Tack.
Jag kom på det bara du sa det.
Ja.
Ja.
Tack.
Now, we are having spoke about Loven freshwater plant for a while. I don't have a scale bar here, so I can't see the sizes, but well, I don't know how big these houses are. It's considerable amount of space that is needed for all of these sand filters and all of these basins where the sludge can sediment. At Loven and at Norsborg, several of them is outside, which is hardly a problem, I think. Says here now, cubic meter per day, 275,000 cubic meter, but on average 150. Amount of sludge is, say, 950 ton per year. DS is probably dense or dehydrated or something like that. So 950 ton, is that a lot? Well, on a year, it is perhaps not a lot. This sludge then contains, well, debris from the lake water that is precipitated out and hardly useful, I guess, for anything. You can perhaps use it for filling up land or something like that. Yeah, no scale bar here either. But have a look at this brochure if you like. And we have also Norsborg, where is the Henriksdal that is of interest. Right. So Henriksdal wastewater plant is this is a small mountain outside, just outside Stockholm area, with some quite large buildings on top of it. So where is the wastewater plant? It is actually inside the mountain, which is perhaps reasonable because this here is perhaps a small building that the only thing visible from outside, and then wastewater come underground and into some arrangement down here. This is perhaps reasonable because the wastewater treatment is not at all as nice as the freshwater production, because here everything that we pour out in the sink and in the toilet and such things show up. Even all of these small ear pins that you perhaps use to clean your ears, and perhaps you shouldn't, but perhaps you do throw them down the toilet and just rinse them out. They show up here to and create some problems in the wastewater plant. They usually complain about a lot of things showing up, but they are prepared. Here is a typical tunnel system with a lot of large basins inside the mountains, and I think it is one of the aeration systems. How large is the precipitate? And we can look here. Treatment required. It's also 241,000 cubic meter per day or something like that. Mechanical treatment, to get rid of earpins and small bicycles and such things that show up. Instead of aluminum, they put in ferrous sulfate. In total, 11 to 20 gram of iron per cubic meter of wastewater. So it's quite a lot compared to the aluminum addition in freshwater production, I think. Primary sedimentation, the volume is of the basins are some 30,000 cubic meters, quite large, but manageable within the mountain. We'll see if we have any. Here is a typical view of a wastewater plant. A lot of basins inside large rooms digged out inside the mountain, and the smell in some of these could be quite awful. When you imagine if you would pour out a lot of toilet waste and treat it with some chemicals and the gaseous substances that come, they will be, of course, ventilated away, but it's not so nice actually doing a study visit. Perhaps we should try to do a study visit. I can check with Chepala if it's open or if it's still going online. The sludge that come from Henriksdal is something like 10,000 cubic meter. Is it per day or is it per year? 10,000 cubic meter. Now it's 2 sludge tanks, yes, that with the volume of 10,000 cubic meter. What is this sludge used for? First, it's fermented actually, produce some gas, say methane or small organic molecules. And I think Stockholm Vatten runs their cars on own produced gas. This is something like 400. What is N? 400 cubic meter biogas per hour. And this is stand for Newton meter cube. I don't understand that. Normal maybe. And organic waste is approximately 24,000 cubic meter per year. This is slightly more than from the freshwater plant. And this is actually containing a lot of phosphates. Not maybe a lot, but a considerable amount of phosphates and other stuff, organic debris from mainly from toilets. What do you do with this sludge? What do you think? Do we put it out on farms in order to use the content of phosphate?
So I don't know about Sweden, but in Germany, they are actually intending to stop this use in agriculture because the sewage sludge is massively contaminated with things like cadmium, also I think traces of arsenic, and it can also come together with multi-resistant bacteria because it contains residues of antibiotics.
Exactly. Yeah, I think you made a good description of also the situation in Sweden, and I think that is quite a common way that farmers argument in very many places in the world. There are some communities in Sweden that are actually using the sludge from wastewater plants, but not many. So that is, I mean, it's a resource, yes, but as you said, cadmium we don't want, and we don't want the arsenic and bacteria and such things, and organic substances that maybe one can process this sludge. And for the moment, I think Stockholm is putting it on train and moving it to north of Sweden. And there is some old mine that is not used as a mine anymore, but there are big holes in the ground so that you can deposit things there. And this is actually what is done, or at least for some years ago, but I think it's still done, because for the moment, no one has any good use of this sludge. It is when the price for phosphor increase in future, then you have perhaps a new phosphor mine where you have deposited this sludge. But as you said, metals, and especially metals like cadmium, arsenic and mercury and such things, they need to be kept outside the ecosystem. They shouldn't be part of our food, at least. We can have them on lab if we treat them for some special reason, but nowhere else. What is it for? A sustainable
society, it says there.
Yeah, exactly. That's good. So here you see an overview of the whole mountain with a lot of basins and chambers that similar processes as we saw in the freshwater plant. I think that here is some overview, schematic overview. Now let's see. Difficult for me. Or is my computer slow? Maybe. Yeah, typically there are more steps in this taking care of the sludge, but essentially very, very similar. You have some grid here that take care of large debris. Then you add iron sulfate with air to get iron 3+, and some flux, primary sedimentation. And there you also get rid of most of the phosphates, but not the ammonium or the nitrates. There, for the getting rid of ammonium and nitrate, then you need a bioreactor, specialized bacteria that are prepared to either denitrify nitrate or oxidize ammonium ions. The final product should be nitrogen gas that is released to the atmosphere. And then some extra sedimentation, some additional more iron sulfate and sand filters, essentially similar schemes as with the freshwater plant, and then let it out in the Baltic or in the archipelago. And this outlet water is essentially free of phosphate, but it do contain not very high, but reduced levels of nitrate and ammonium. Maybe in the best case, 30% of what was present in the inlet water. That is good. It's better than nothing, and it's one could guess, is it really necessary to purify both phosphates and nitrogen? in principle, one could say that phosphate is enough. And then it doesn't matter that we pour out nitrogen, because that will anyway taken care of by some bacteria in the seawater, and then we will end up with nitrogen gas. But without phosphate, we don't get eutrophication or any growth in the sea. So unfortunately, that is not a correct argument, because even though we don't pour out phosphate in the seawater here, there is phosphate hidden in the sediments. And if there comes some nitrate or nitrogen containing water from the archipelago out in the Baltic, combined with a phosphate release from the sediments, then we have a good situation for a lot of things growing also in the archipelago, which we actually see that is happening. We see this algae blooming, and there is it's not at all limited in some way of nutrition. It seems to be kind of good supply of nutrition in the Baltic. But of course, I mean, decreasing what we as humans add to the natural system is probably completely correct. It's not so expensive. And I think
I'm sorry, Lars.
Yes?
You
What?
said something about sodium forming. No, I'm sorry. Wait 2 seconds. Yeah, H2S is formed. It's in the sediment spontaneously.
Yeah.
No?
Yeah.
Yeah. How is it formed? Like, from where does it come from?
The origin of the sulfate is probably sulfate ions in the water.
Okay, so all of this process, they're still left in there, or are they spontaneously formed while this process is continuing?
What process are you referring to? I mean, if we have nutrients flowing out in the sea, then something grows here, and when it dies, then it falls to the bottom, and carbon containing compounds is essentially something like a source of electron that could reduce
okay, that was the
sulfur.
part. Okay.
Yeah, sulfur in sulfate ions. Of course, it may need help of bacteria. There are bacteria that actually live on sulfate ions and also reduced sulfate, but they can probably eat organic debris also.
Yeah, because I thought they were formed in this process that you were talking about.
No, not here.
That's why
we don't.
I was asking, because I knew in water we talked about it 2 lessons ago.
Yeah, exactly.
But this one I thought, okay, well, thank you.
Here the major outlet is essentially low levels of phosphate and not so low levels of nitrate and ammonium, but at least decreased levels, considerably decreased. And most of the bacteria and bad things that are present in the wastewater, that is taken care of in the wastewater plant here. It's not risky nowadays to bath in the archipelago water, and it's actually not risky even to bath in the Stockholm harbor water, well, except you be driven over by a boat or something like that. Not chemical, but for 100 years ago, then we didn't have this wastewater plant. But still a lot of wastewater, and that went directly out in the harbor area in Slussen, for example. And then the water around Stockholm, well, outside in the saltwater part, I don't think that people freely took a bath there. So there are no baths available, I think. But I mean, it doesn't smell so bad unless you put down a sample fetcher and fetch up some things from the bottom. The water close to Slussen is quite deep. It's something like 25-30 meters. But if you fetch up a sample from the bottom, you will feel a lot of awful smells due to the fact that there has been activity going on for quite a while, several 100 years, and organic stuff has been collected there and decomposed. Oil, for example. But not anymore. Even ships that arrive in the harbor, they are not allowed to rinse the tanks and just pour out the wastewater in the harbor, but they need to take care of the waste, which is good, I think. As long as there is an infrastructure for taking care of wastewater, one should use it. And then there are a lot of extra arrangement for taking care of the sludge and the biogas formed, for example. The sludge need to be fermented for some time. I don't know, several days, I would guess, in order for bacteria to produce this biogas. This is, I don't know how many cars it can support, but 10, 20, 30 or something like that. So it's not an alternative for the society as a whole, but at least for a small company. Why not? When they have access to a lot of sludge. So where were we? We were in free. Yeah. So the resource problem, why don't we use the waste from wastewater plants, the sludge from wastewater plants, as some of you said just recently, there is a risk that it contains some poisonous metals and poisonous chemicals. But, well, nitrogen we can produce from air, so we don't need to take care of the nitrogen fertilizers. It's also a relatively short cycle time between nitrogen in the air and the use of nitrogen as a fertilizer and the production of new or the decomposition of nitrate and ammonium in the wastewater plant going back to the atmosphere. The nitrogen that flows out in the sea will also finally end up in the atmosphere. So there is a good cycle scheme for nitrogen. What is a problem is phosphorus. It very often occurs as hydroxyapatite. This is a mineral with this approximately this chemical composition. This is the same mineral as in bone and your teeth, for example. By a coincidence, it's a very, very hard material. One of the hardest that can be done with the calcium and phosphates and hydroxides. One can also just speak about calcium phosphates. It's not necessary to go into details about certain minerals. But this phosphorus fertilizers, they have a price, a different price. You mentioned cadmium, and I mentioned cadmium. Cadmium can substitute calcium, and in that respect, it is far from healthy. If the phosphate mineral contains, I would say 1% calcium, 1% cadmium, I mean, then it's useless. Then it need to be done a lot of processing. It can be purified, but as usual, this costs money. Buying cadmium containing phosphorus minerals with cadmium do cost less, but then you need to invest in, say, for example, a lot of sulfuric acid to dissolve these, and then you get phosphoric acid from the phosphates, and then perhaps either you use the phosphoric acid directly, or you need to purify that, or perhaps precipitate it as calcium phosphate. And then you need to buy these pure calcium minerals somewhere from, not containing cadmium. Can be done, but it costs money and it costs a lot of effort to do that. It is done partly already. Well, it is, but it's easier. There are still a lot of high quality deposits in phosphate mines, and they are they're not infinite resources, so they will last for maybe 50 years in the worst case, or 100 years in a slightly better case. But then, I mean, time is running out for phosphorus. We need to find other ways to supply farmers with phosphorus fertilizers, and perhaps from wastewater debris, or digging out minerals from the ocean floor. There has over very long time been a deposit of organic material with, among other things, phosphorus on the ocean floor. It's not nice to have a mine on the ocean floor, but there is a lot of phosphorus down there. So perhaps we will see automatic mines or robots or something like that. There will probably be no humans down there. We'll see. Or your children or grandchildren, they will see. And as I said, what to purify? Nitrogen or phosphor, or actually both should be good. Because the nitrogen to phosphor, it should be this, ideally this Redfield ratio, if it's optimal for growth of, for example, plankton. And the good thing with phosphor, it's easy to precipitate. Approximately as aluminum phosphate or iron phosphate, or similar to the acidity of aluminum and iron. Phosphate ions, they are basic, so they will form a lot of easily formed and very stable compounds. Iron is cheaper than aluminum. That is the reason why iron is used, I think. And it's also simultaneously not very poisonous. You shouldn't eat a lot of iron, iron containing things. Some people, or at least maybe, yeah, some people have a lack of iron, and they need to eat some additives of iron, but not a lot, at least. Take care and eat them if you're medical doctor says that you should do, but don't eat additional things otherwise, and not iron at least. Eat fresh fruit and such things. Nitrogen is tricky. It can't be precipitated. We need to have some bacteria transforming nitrate and ammonia. Yeah, Stockholm Water is producing drinking water, wastewater, taking care of wastewater, monitoring quality of Lake Mälaren and the archipelago. But it's not only Stockholm Water. There is a wastewater plant at Lidingö, and also down at the south part of Södertörn, not Nynäshamn, it's on the other side. Well, it's in the southern part of close to the sea. There's a wastewater plant also, a small one, but very efficient. Yeah, I stopped it. And other methods of cleaning water, that is actually of use somewhere at some places in the world. Reverse osmosis is a method. Normal osmosis is the spontaneous sort of concentration dilution. I mean, if you take a bath for a long time, then your skin absorbs a lot of water and you get wrinkles on your skin, on your fingertips, for example. That is a process related to osmosis. Or if you have some kind of salt solution in a bag and then you let it out in fresh water, then both either if salt will go out through the barrier or water will go inside and dilute this one. This is normal osmosis. Do I have a figure? No, I don't. I draw something. So if we suppose we're using a YouTube and we have some barrier here. And here you have salt water. And here you have only water. So what will happen? Water will penetrate through, and unless these ion, if they can penetrate through, then it will be a dilution. But probably the end result will be something like that. That the solution here in the saltwater region will be diluted. And still there are some, and the distance here, one can speak about related to the osmotic pressure of water inside this salt solution. This is a spontaneous process and not useful, actually. But if we put pressure down here, it is perhaps possible to go in this direction. I mean, this could be seawater. And we have a lack of fresh water at very many places in the world. So if this could be taken care of and production of fresh water, then we would call this reverse osmosis process. Well, this is a reverse osmosis. This is used at several places in the world. In Australia, for example, all the cities, large cities, they lie close to the to the sea. And where do they get their drinking water from? Either they have lakes and rivers, or if it's a desert landscape, they need to take the water from where it's available, that is the sea. But you can't drink ocean water, that is, then you will die. It's too salty. But with the reverse osmosis, I'm not sure, there are of course lakes also in Australia, but not enough, I think. And I think in very heavily populated areas in the Far East, for example, at the seaside in South China, there is a lot of freshwater plants that is using this reverse osmosis, and the source of fresh water is seawater, because there is an infinite amount of seawater, or a large amount. It's just to pump in, but you need to get rid of the say something like 3% sodium chloride. That in our bodily liquids, the content is 0.9%. So we need to get far well below that in order to be able to use the water as drinking water. In Stockholm, in the archipelago, the salt concentration is something like 0.2%, and even that is way too high to be. You can taste the water tomorrow when we go on excursion. So I would say 0.05% or something like that. This is just a guess. I don't know the limit where it is useful for, say, human consumption. But that is in practice also possible nowadays. The problem is to find a membrane that is strong enough and tight enough for not letting ions out, but letting water pass through the holes in the membrane. It's not at all small pressures that are needed, quite high pressures. So the mechanical properties of this membrane, they are kind of important. Otherwise, I mentioned distillation. Is that a reasonable way to purify water? Then you will get very, very pure water. Or deionization. Or perhaps, but it will cost a lot due to the fact that evaporating water is a very costly process. But this is not done unless you need extremely pure water. Or you go out and inhabit countryside, and then you use ion exchange in wetlands or gravel ridges or something like that to get rid of the, and use the rain water. You can collect it and keep it in barrels or so, because then you can be sure that there will be bacteria and small worms and such things that live in the water. Don't drink water that has been standing in barrel over the winter. That's then you will have a disease, I promise you. Now we'll see. Clock is 10:51. We should speak about what we should do on lab on Thursday, but an excursion tomorrow. But first, perhaps we should have a break. 10:52. Is it 7 minutes past 11 or something like that? Is that okay?
Sure.
Sure.
Då